Even the wisest guardians of the Force are not immune to the weight of tragedy, and for Yoda, that weight came with a force that no foresight, skill, or diplomacy could entirely withstand. The galaxy, in its complexity, had always demanded vigilance, but it also demanded humility, the understanding that even the most careful intentions could falter. Yoda, despite centuries of training and a growing mastery of the Force, faced his first true test when a diplomatic mission, designed to reconcile warring factions on a distant system, collapsed into chaos. The outcomes were catastrophic. Entire communities perished, leaders he had sought to protect fell to treachery, and the fragile peace he had helped nurture was shattered. The burden of responsibility, immense and suffocating, settled upon him with a weight that no meditation could fully alleviate. This failure was not born of arrogance or negligence. Yoda had anticipated conflict, considered contingencies, and approached negotiations with the utmost care. Yet in the shadows of political ambition and hidden agendas, forces moved that even his profound sensitivity to the Force could not fully predict. Allies betrayed him, whispers of deceit and manipulation undermined every effort, and violence erupted where dialogue had once promised resolution. Yoda watched, powerless to prevent catastrophe despite his clarity and patience. It was the first time in his long life that he felt the bitter sting of impotence, the realization that wisdom alone could not always shield the innocent. The immediate aftermath was devastating. Yoda walked among the ruins, surveying a landscape scarred not only by physical destruction but by the echoes of lost lives and shattered hopes. The faces of those who had perished haunted him, and the weight of their absence pressed upon his consciousness like a relentless tide. In this crucible of grief, he confronted an internal truth. No matter how disciplined, how attuned to the Force, or how morally steadfast, failure could strike even the most prepared. The Force, in all its guidance and balance, did not prevent loss. It offered clarity and perspective, but it did not absolve one from responsibility. For Yoda, this was a lesson written in pain, one that would forever shape the contours of his philosophy. The psychological impact of the loss was profound. Where once Yoda's patience and optimism allowed him to navigate complex situations with subtlety, the scars of this failure instilled a quiet caution, a deepened awareness of human, and alien, frailty. He realized that the galaxy's currents were not solely governed by justice, morality, or the guidance of the Jedi. Greed, fear, ambition, and hatred moved beneath the surface, often imperceptible, and even the most enlightened guardian could be blindsided. Yoda's stoic exterior, already a hallmark of his character, now concealed a private vulnerability, a recognition that even the Force's wisdom had limits in the face of free will's unpredictability. Yet within this failure, there emerged a transformation of character that would define the rest of his life. Yoda's commitment to nonviolence, tempered by experience, became absolute. He understood that force, no matter how righteous, could never fully prevent suffering. Compassion, patience, and discernment, qualities he had long valued, now carried a deeper, almost sacred weight. He began to cultivate a philosophy grounded not merely in instruction or tradition, but in the lived experience of loss, humility, and enduring moral responsibility. Each moment of grief became a teacher, each loss a reminder that true guardianship required more than skill. It demanded resilience, reflection, and an unwavering devotion to the principles of life and balance. In the broader context of the galaxy, this failure marked a subtle but significant turning point. Systems that had once looked to the Jedi with hope and reverence now approached with caution, some even questioning the Order's capacity to maintain peace. For Yoda, these reactions were not merely political obstacles, they were signals, warnings of the delicate equilibrium that always teetered on the edge of collapse. He realized that diplomacy was not simply negotiation, it was vigilance, humility, and the acknowledgement that the consequences of action, or inaction, could ripple across worlds in ways impossible to foresee. The lesson was profound. Even the most enlightened beings could be ensnared by the unforeseen, and it was in response to failure that true wisdom was revealed. Yet Yoda did not allow despair to dominate. Even amid grief and regret, he turned his focus inward, seeking understanding from the Force itself. Meditation, reflection, and study became tools not merely for mastery, but for reconciliation with the realities of imperfection. He learned to accept the limits of control, recognizing that loss, though painful, could refine character, deepen empathy, and sharpen judgment. In this, Yoda emerged more capable, more discerning, and more attuned to the fragile balance he was sworn to protect. The scars of tragedy became invisible instruments of growth, shaping the depth of insight that would allow him to navigate future crises with unparalleled clarity. This moment, the first great failure, also prepared Yoda for the trials that would follow on an even grander scale. The galaxy was moving inexorably toward upheaval, and the challenges that lay ahead would demand resilience, wisdom, and moral courage far beyond the ordinary. The seeds of patience, compassion, and foresight that took root in this painful chapter would become his guiding lights during centuries of conflict, betrayal, and devastation. Yoda's capacity to endure sorrow, to learn from it, and to channel it into deeper understanding would define him not just as a Jedi, but as a guardian capable of navigating the most perilous currents of the Force. In retrospect, this failure, devastating as it was, marked the beginning of the evolution of Yoda's philosophy and leadership. He learned that mastery of the Force was inseparable from the mastery of self, and that wisdom alone could not shield one from the cruel unpredictability of life. The quiet, unspoken scar he carried shaped every decision, every act of guidance, and every choice to protect life, even when the cost was great. In this way, loss became a teacher, grief a compass, and failure a crucible that forged the resilience and clarity that would define Yoda for centuries to come. By the end of this first great trial, Yoda had emerged tempered but unbroken. His insight into the fragility of peace deepened, his empathy grew more profound, and his understanding of the Force expanded beyond technique into the domain of wisdom born from experience. The galaxy had revealed both its cruelty and its potential for harmony, and Yoda, small in stature but vast in understanding, took his place as a being prepared to bear the burdens that others could not. It was here, amid loss and reflection, that the first true echoes of the legend of Yoda began to resonate, setting the stage for the trials, triumphs, and sacrifices that would define an era. The galaxy, vast and radiant, often hides its rot beneath the gleaming surfaces of power and diplomacy. In the years following Yoda's first great trial, shadows began to creep across the Republic, subtle yet insidious, imperceptible to those blinded by the comforts of routine and the allure of authority. Corruption festered quietly in the Senate chambers, twisting noble intentions into self-interest, while criminal syndicates expanded their influence across star systems with the patience of a predator stalking its prey. The Jedi, guardians of peace, found themselves ensnared in bureaucracy, their vigilance dulled by tradition and protocol. Yet Yoda, attuned to the currents of the Force, felt the encroaching darkness with a clarity that was almost painful, a storm forming on the horizon, its shape and scale hidden, its approach inevitable. It began with small tremors. Trade disputes escalated into violent skirmishes that the Republic seemed unwilling or unable to contain. Outer Rim territories, distant and neglected, fell prey to criminal networks, their leaders exploiting every weakness in law and governance. Senators, distracted by ambition or comfort, debated endlessly while crises unfolded, rarely heeding warnings from a Jedi, who foresaw the consequences that bureaucracy could not prevent. Yoda sensed the moral imbalance in these moments, the hunger for power, the willingness to sacrifice lives for personal gain, and the slow, almost imperceptible decay of institutions once thought invincible. These were the signs of a storm that no diplomacy alone could disperse. The Force whispered warnings that others failed to hear. Yoda meditated, reaching across the currents of life and energy, seeking patterns and disturbances that might illuminate the cause of the growing malaise. He saw the rise of unseen actors, manipulations orchestrated by those skilled in the subtler arts of control, and he felt the pull of the dark side, a shadow coiling and waiting for its opportunity. His insights, shared with the Jedi Council, were met with polite dismissal or cautious concern, but rarely with the urgency he believed necessary. He was a voice raised against indifference, a sentinel warning of a catastrophe yet to be fully comprehended. The Senate itself, a monument to democratic ideals, became both stage and prison for these unfolding crises. Decisions were often driven by political theater rather than principle, and even acts of genuine governance were undermined by secrecy, personal interest, and fear. Yoda's missions increasingly took him to the edges of the galaxy, where he confronted the tangible effects of these failures: worlds destabilized by internal strife, families torn apart by injustice, and civilizations at the brink of collapse. Each encounter reminded him that the galaxy's fragility was not abstract, but lived, breathed, and often lethal. And with each step, the sense of an approaching storm grew, pressing down on his consciousness like the weight of countless lives yet untouched by conflict. Despite his awareness, the true nature of the darkness remained elusive. It was not an army, nor a single enemy to confront with lightsaber and strategy. It was a slow, insidious corruption, a combination of greed, ambition, and hidden malevolence that could shape events without ever revealing itself. Yoda saw its manifestations in subtle manipulations, secret alliances, and whispers of betrayal. He felt its tendrils reach into hearts of those who wielded power, bending them to purposes unknown or unacknowledged. And though he worked tirelessly to counteract it, to warn, to mediate, the storm continued to gather strength, moving silently yet inexorably toward a future none could yet fully perceive. In these years, Yoda also observed a subtle transformation within the Jedi Order itself. The Order, venerable and wise, began to show signs of complacency. Masters clung to tradition, adhering to ancient rituals with rigid reverence even as the galaxy evolved around them. Some saw the Force as a tool for instruction rather than insight, a set of rules rather than a living current guiding moral and spiritual judgment. Yoda understood that this complacency was as dangerous as any external threat, for the Jedi were the galaxy's guardians, and if they failed to see clearly, the consequences would be catastrophic. The cracks within the Order mirrored the cracks within the Republic, a reflection of the broader decay in institutions that had once been the pillars of civilization. It was in this context that Yoda's vigilance became both necessity and burden. He traveled to distant systems, intervening quietly, guiding local leaders, and attempting to steady the fragile structures that civilization still relied upon. His strategies combined moral insight with practical action, yet even the smallest successes felt insufficient against the growing tide of darkness. He understood that preparation alone could not prevent calamity, and that foresight without action could still leave the galaxy vulnerable. In this delicate balancing act, Yoda's wisdom deepened, shaped not only by knowledge but by the profound awareness that some storms could not be stopped, only endured, mitigated, and learned from. Amid the rising darkness, Yoda also wrestled with profound questions of responsibility. The Jedi had long been the galaxy's protectors, but could they, in their traditional role, prevent the unfolding catastrophe? Was their commitment to neutrality and peace enough in a universe increasingly dominated by greed, deception, and ambition? The Force itself seemed to offer both warning and guidance, yet the path forward remained uncertain. In these moments, Yoda's philosophy began to crystallize. True guardianship required not only vigilance and skill, but courage, adaptability, and a willingness to confront the consequences of decisions that would test both the Jedi and the galaxy itself. By the end of this era, the storm had become undeniable. Systems once stable teetered on the brink of conflict, criminal networks wielded influence in shadows, and the Jedi Council remained constrained by rules and tradition that failed to address the galaxy's emerging crises. Yoda, small in form but vast in insight, prepared himself for the trials to come. The coming war, he realized, would test not only their mastery of the Force, but their very capacity for moral clarity in the face of overwhelming darkness. The currents of destiny were shifting, and the galaxy, for all its brilliance, would soon discover the cost of complacency. In hindsight, these years were the quiet but decisive prelude to chaos. Yoda's awareness of the encroaching darkness, his foresight, and his moral vigilance would mark him as a sentinel of the Republic in its most desperate hours. The storm that approached was not merely political or military. It was a reckoning of principles, ethics, and the Force itself. And in the stillness before the eruption, Yoda stood ready, guided by wisdom born from experience, grief, and reflection, prepared to bear the burden of what was to come, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian of life, balance, and the enduring light of the galaxy. War, once a distant shadow on the edges of Yoda's perception, became an unrelenting reality, sweeping across the galaxy with a fury that tested every principle he had long held sacred. The Clone Wars erupted not as a sudden blaze, but as a slow, encroaching inferno, consuming worlds, lives, and the fragile structures of the Republic he had sought to protect. Yoda, a guardian of peace by instinct and choice, was called to a role he had never desired, that of a general. In this capacity, he commanded armies, orchestrated campaigns across war-torn planets, and bore witness to the scale of suffering that industrialized conflict could unleash. Every victory, though strategically essential, felt as if it exacted a moral toll. Each life lost a reminder of the costs of intervention, and each triumph a shadow upon his conscience. The transition from peacekeeper to military leader was neither natural nor comfortable. Yoda had spent centuries cultivating understanding, empathy, and balance, and yet the exigencies of war demanded decisions that clashed with every ideal he had held. He found himself calculating troop movements, assessing enemy strengths, and making choices that could doom thousands to death, not out of malice, but necessity. The battlefield was a harsh teacher, revealing truths about the fragility of life and the limits of foresight. Yoda learned that even wisdom and the Force could not fully predict the chaos of war, that morality often collided violently with strategy, and that compromise sometimes demanded the sacrifice of innocence. Across desolate worlds scarred by bombardment and occupation, Yoda witnessed the tangible consequences of galactic conflict. Cities that had once flourished became ruins. Ecosystems that had thrived for millennia were decimated by the machinery of war. Populations were displaced, families torn apart, and hope eroded by the relentless advance of armies and the schemes of hidden manipulators. The Force, which had once whispered in the quiet moments of meditation, now roared with the echoes of suffering. Yoda felt the pain of every life endangered, every child orphaned, and every world destabilized, and in these moments, the burden of command weighed heavier than any lightsaber could ever be. Yet Yoda was not merely a figure of strategy. He remained a guardian of life in every decision. He sought to minimize casualties wherever possible, guiding clones with care, instructing commanders in restraint, and choosing engagement only when absolutely necessary. His ability to perceive the underlying currents of the Force allowed him to anticipate enemy maneuvers, outwit adversaries, and achieve victories that, while strategically decisive, preserved countless lives that might otherwise have been lost. Each battle demanded ingenuity and foresight, and Yoda's mastery of both earned him the unwavering respect of allies and the wary acknowledgement of enemies alike. Despite his careful deliberation, the scale of the Clone Wars revealed the limits of wisdom and pacifism. Yoda understood, more clearly than ever, that the Jedi were being drawn into the machinery of war, that their role as guardians of peace was being eroded by circumstance. With every campaign he led, he felt the Order's transformation from advisors and mediators into generals and warriors, a shift both necessary and deeply unsettling. The ideals of the Jedi, once a shield against corruption and chaos, now competed with the brutal demands of strategy and survival. Yoda, small in form but vast in responsibility, became both a beacon of hope and a symbol of the tragic compromises imposed by conflict. Amid these trials, Yoda's leadership extended beyond tactics and battlefields. He mentored clone commanders, nurtured young Jedi under his guidance, and counseled allies in the art of resilience. Even in moments of extreme duress, he exemplified the principles he had long championed: humility, clarity, and unwavering moral focus. His presence on the front lines was both inspirational and grounding, reminding those under his command that even amid destruction, life retained intrinsic value, and that the choices of a single being, however small, could shape the fates of thousands. The Clone Wars also deepened Yoda's understanding of the dark currents pervading the galaxy. He witnessed ambition twisted into cruelty, loyalty corrupted into deceit, and ideals betrayed by those who wielded power without conscience. The shadow of the Sith, subtle yet pervasive, became increasingly evident as the war progressed, revealing the extent to which the Republic was vulnerable to manipulation and decay. Yoda's perception of the Force allowed him to glimpse these hidden threads, and though he struggled to counteract them entirely, his insight became a guiding compass, shaping strategy and providing a framework to endure what seemed inevitable to be why the end of the early campaigns, Yoda had been transformed. The Jedi he had known, the guardians of peace and mediators of justice, had become participants in an expansive, galaxy-wide war. Each battle demanded not only skill but moral courage. Each decision weighed not only on immediate outcomes but on the enduring health of the Republic. Yoda's victories were tempered by grief, each triumph a reminder of the lives forever altered or lost. Yet even in the midst of devastation, he maintained a steady hand, a measured heart, and an unwavering commitment to the principles that had guided him since the earliest days of his training. In reflection, the Clone Wars marked a profound shift in Yoda's journey. He learned that the Force, while a guide, could not eliminate suffering or prevent moral compromise. He discovered that leadership demanded a balance between idealism and pragmatism, and that guardianship could require actions that conflicted with personal conviction. Most importantly, he realized that peace, once thought to be a living condition easily maintained, was fragile, contingent, and constantly threatened by forces both visible and unseen. The war forged him not only as a strategist but as a philosopher of survival, ethics, and the profound responsibilities of power. The lessons of the Clone Wars would echo through every choice Yoda made in the centuries to come. The experiences of command, loss, and moral struggle deepened his wisdom, tempered his patience, and honed the insight that would allow him to guide future generations. Though the galaxy raged around him, and though victory often arrived at a cost too great to measure, Yoda endured, a small figure embodying vast courage, clarity, and compassion. He became a master not merely of armies, but of the moral complexities inherent in wielding authority, of the delicate balance between action and consequence, and of the unyielding pursuit of justice amid chaos. In the crucible of war, Yoda's character was forged, and the galaxy would come to rely on this rare combination of wisdom, courage, and insight, a beacon capable of guiding not only armies but the destiny of the Republic itself. The Clone Wars were only the beginning of a journey that would demand all of his strength, intellect, and morality, shaping a figure whose legend would endure long after empires rose and fell. The galaxy had never known a darkness so cunning, so patient, and so absolute. For centuries, the Jedi had served as guardians of peace, mediators of conflict, and beacons of morality in an unpredictable universe. Yet no foresight, no skill, no meditation could have fully prepared Yoda for the betrayal that would strike at the very heart of the Order he had devoted his life to preserving. The Clone Wars, which had tested his wisdom and endurance, were but a prelude. Beneath the veneer of the Republic, a malignant force had been weaving its influence, and when it struck, it left devastation beyond comprehension. The Jedi Order, once a symbol of stability, was shattered in a single, orchestrated strike, a shatterpoint in the galaxy's history from which there would be no immediate recovery. It began quietly, insidiously. The very clones that had fought under the Jedi banner, who had trained with them and trusted them, became instruments of extermination. Order 66, whispered across battle networks and executed with terrifying precision, transformed loyal soldiers into assassins. Planets that had known peace under Jedi guidance were suddenly sites of massacre, and young Jedi who had survived the chaos of war found themselves hunted without mercy. Yoda, sensing the betrayal through the Force, was forced into immediate action, evading attacks that were designed to kill him as surely as any lightsaber could. The betrayal was not only military but moral, an inversion of the natural order that the Jedi had protected for millennia. As the full scope of the treachery unfolded, Yoda realized that the Republic itself had been compromised. Senators he had trusted, systems he had safeguarded, and alliances he had nurtured were all vulnerable to manipulation. Darth Sidious, the architect of the catastrophe, had ensnared not only the Jedi but the galaxy's governance, exploiting ambition, fear, and deception to eliminate the very guardians meant to preserve balance. The Force, though powerful, could not prevent this catastrophe entirely. Yoda's perception allowed him to see the inevitability of the fall, yet even with all his skill, he could not stop the destruction from spreading. The Order, which had endured countless wars and crises, was being erased in a matter of days, leaving Yoda to confront a reality he had never imagined, that the Guardians could become victims, that Order could collapse, and that betrayal could be more lethal than any lightsaber. The emotional weight of this betrayal was immense. Yoda, small in stature but monumental in responsibility, carried the grief of hundreds of lives lost, mentors, peers, and younglings alike. Each name, each face, each memory pressed against his consciousness with unbearable clarity. Yet grief was not indulgence. It was recognition, a necessary confrontation with the consequences of trust misplaced and vigilance insufficient. Yoda understood that mourning could not paralyze him. The galaxy demanded action, even when despair threatened to consume the spirit of the Jedi. Survival, insight, and clarity became his tools, guiding him through the wreckage of an order that had once seemed invincible. In this chaos, Yoda's understanding of the Force became both shield and compass. He moved with precision through systems engulfed in betrayal, sensing danger before it arrived, perceiving the subtle manipulations of the dark side that sought to unbalance him. Confrontations with Sith agents revealed the depth of Sidious's strategy. Not merely a coup, but a philosophical and spiritual subversion of the Republic and the Jedi alike. Yoda realized that the fall of the Order was not only a political event but a moral crisis, testing the resilience of every principle the Jedi had long upheld. Strength alone could not prevail. Clarity, patience, and the deepest understanding of the Force were now essential for survival. Yoda's confrontation with Darth Sidious, though brief and measured, illuminated the depth of deception that had ensnared the Republic and the Jedi. Here, the galaxy's corruption and ambition were made manifest, a single figure embodying centuries of manipulation, foresight, and the relentless pursuit of domination. Yoda, though powerful beyond imagination, recognized that victory would not come through combat alone. The Sith had exploited fear, desire, and weakness, turning allies against each other and leaving the Jedi Order vulnerable to annihilation. Sidious had demonstrated that even the most disciplined guardians could be undone, not by strength, but by the clever orchestration of betrayal and political cunning. By the time Yoda evaded his would-be assassins and sought refuge in the shadows, the Order lay in ruin. Temples were destroyed, councils dissolved, and the surviving Jedi scattered to the stars, hunted like prey in a galaxy that had once revered them. The weight of responsibility pressed upon Yoda in a way no battle had ever done. He understood that the fall of the Order was not merely a tactical loss but a philosophical and spiritual collapse. The principles he had dedicated his life to preserving were under assault, and the galaxy teetered on the brink of tyranny and despair. This was a new kind of battle, one in which survival, teaching, and the preservation of knowledge became more vital than any military victory. Yet amid this devastation, Yoda's resilience endured. The lessons of previous failures, the moral clarity forged in decades of diplomacy and war, and the insight gained from countless trials allowed him to navigate the collapse with strategic patience. Though the Jedi Order had fallen, the essence of its wisdom, the understanding of balance, the cultivation of patience, and the reverence for life, remained within him. Yoda, though alone and hunted, became a living repository of the Order's principles, a guardian whose vigilance now took the form of survival and preparation for a future in which the Force itself would be the ultimate guide. The fall of the Jedi was total, yet not absolute. Yoda, carrying the scars of loss, grief, and betrayal, embodied the quiet resilience of a philosophy that could endure beyond destruction. He understood that the galaxy had shifted, that the Republic would never be the same, and that a new era of darkness was emerging. But he also knew that the Force, though veiled by tragedy, still offered hope. Even in exile and solitude, the principles of the Jedi could endure, preserved in the clarity of thought, in the discipline of spirit, and in the commitment to balance. Yoda's survival was more than escape. It was the seed of continuity, a glimmer of light in a galaxy poised on the brink of despair. By the end of this chapter, the Jedi Order lay shattered, the Republic weakened, and the Sith ascendant. Yet Yoda, small yet formidable, resilient yet contemplative, carried within him the enduring potential of hope. The Shatterpoint had arrived, and with it, a reckoning that would define the galaxy for generations. The fall of the Jedi was not the end of their wisdom, but the beginning of its most critical test, a trial that would require courage, insight, and the patient endurance of one of the galaxy's smallest, yet most profound, guardians.